Excellent, excellent. Okay, so this is probably one of the fundamental things because it's kind of everything in one spot. This document, it does a pretty good job. Clearly, the guy is not a scientist, but clearly he's not stupid either, right? He's able to take some pretty complex information. He talks about it in a reasonably layperson language, so it should be accessible. But I'm not going to lie, there's technical stuff in there. It isn't the easiest read. So if you've gotten through it, kudos, well done. Hopefully, reading a bit of Bentov first was, sort of opened you up to some of the ideas. Having practiced also gave you some personal experience to go on, and then having watched these videos as well was additional context, so that by the time you actually read the document, even if you don't get every part of it, hopefully the story in sum was reasonably clear. Obviously, you can go back to it. You can watch those videos again. Going through it a few times will be really helpful. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on the core things so that there's a clear relationship between the sort of philosophy and theory, right, of kind of the model of the universe, I guess, with the neuroscience, with the specifics of the technique, so the audio technology, as well as how it links to some of the training and practices that have been done by, like Buddhists and like transcendental meditators through generations, thousands of years, right? Because what I think is great about this technique is that it does pay respect or homage to a lot of ancient disciplines, as well as the advances of modern science, right? And it doesn't do violence to any of them. In fact, it kind of integrates them. And that's a good metaphor for what's actually happening within the brain. So it's integrating knowledge that we've come to, like the West is very logical and analytical and scientific, and that's why we're so technologically advanced. But the East has been very holistic and very creative and very spiritual. And what he's done is show how they're both getting to the same thing through different pathways. And that's, again, it's a good metaphor for what the brain is doing, because we have sort of an analytical brain in the left hemisphere, and we have a kind of a holistic creative brain in the right hemisphere. And they obviously can operate as both, but they operate best when they are integrated. Okay, and so this actually could be a sign of something for a consciousness, for humanity going forward, that we will collectively operate best when we bring together, our genius technology with our really intuitive spiritual insights. And we could be on the verge with, global population, internet, technology, etc. We could be on a verge of seeing some really great integration in these human disciplines that have emerged sort of separately. So I think there's some really exciting stuff here, and I think the document does a great job of, piecing that together. Hopefully I can do some justice to that whole process. So I'm going to basically go through in the order the document is laid out. It starts with going through some of the fundamental techniques. So it goes through this idea of hypnosis, through transcendental meditation, and biofeedback, right? So hypnosis is the idea that we can get ourselves into certain brain states that open us up to suggestibility. The way that they talk about it in this document and through the Monroe Institute, and caveat here, I'm just going to talk about how they talk about it. I'm not going to say what's right or wrong, but they've given it a logical explanation, and it seems broadly aligned with what we know from neuroscience, with the understanding that neuroscience has advanced a lot in 50 years. So some of the technology or terminology is outdated. So I'm going to talk about how they talk about it without worrying too much about what's technically correct with cutting edge modern neuroscience. But the basic idea is that the left hemisphere, being the analytical, logical, linear hemisphere, processor information that operates sort of like a computer, it's very critical of information that comes in. And so when we're in our normal waking state, this part of our brain is taking in information, being critical about it, and then passing information to sort of our right hemisphere or to other parts of our brain in a way that is saying, well, I've evaluated this information and I'm passing to you what is necessary for you to operate properly. If we went into a hypnotic state, effectively what's happening is we're just sort of calming that critical element of our thinking so that information is more easily passed into these holistic and creative sides or parts of the brain or ways of operating so that more information can be passed directly into the subconscious mind, right? That's the basic idea. The hypnosis is about shutting off slightly the most critical elements of the mind so that we can access the subconscious mind a little bit more easily. Transcendental meditation, on the other hand, is about sort of like creating this integrative, higher, expanded consciousness experience, right? People have been talking about these unity experiences, expansion, out of body experiences, whatever you want to call them, transcendental experiences. And one of the most well known is this idea of the Kundalini, which is Kundalini is a way of talking about a sort of a snake-like energy that worms its way up through the body. And so this is associated with the chakra system. So the idea is that when you align all of your chakras, they're all balanced and operating properly, then you'll feel an integration of this energy through your body as though a snake is winding its way up into your head from the base of your spine. And when you open the crown chakra, it feels as though this snake sort of like, or this energy explodes out your head. And then you start to feel like there's this connection of energy through your body, so out of your head, in through your feet, and it winds up your spine and continues. And then as you raise that Kundalini, and as you get practiced with it, this energy flows through you more readily. The first time you do this, it can be quite a transcendent experience. It feels like energy and explosions, and it's this crazy thing. And in fact, the reference they have in that section is called Kundalini, psychosis or transcendence, because if you don't really have a frame of reference for this stuff, people consider it a psychiatric disorder, schizophrenia, some kind of schizotypal experience, or a psychosis, because we haven't really got a good language to understand this energy in the West. See, in the East, in shamanic and Ayurvedic practices with chakras, they understand it. It's energy, right? And it's not seen as psychosis, and people find it as a very enjoyable experience. In the West, however, people experience it as psychosis. So that's curious in itself. Okay, so there's that, Kundalini, and then biofeedback. And this is the idea that the information that our body produces is sort of fed back in as input to the brain's model, or our like sensory or motor inputs. So our outputs are fed back as inputs, and this creates this sort of like recurrent processing. So when you have these all combined, when you have like your energy moving through your body in the Kundalini, you're in a suggestible, hypnotic sort of semi-sleep-like state, and you have this feedback, it can create very pleasurable, highly energetic experiences of expanded consciousness. And so the idea is that is what the gateway process is doing. It's taking each of these elements and combining them into a singular methodology. So what we have here is images of the brain. This one here is probably the most relevant. You may or may not be familiar with the term homunculus, which basically just means little man, or a little representation, or little body, something like that. Probably Ricardo knows his Latin better than anyone here, I'll assume. So I'm sure there's a direct translation. But basically, it means that within the brain, so we obviously have the physical body, and we have a nervous system that connects the body to the brain. But then within the brain, we actually have a full representation. Actually, not just one representation, we have multiple. So two primary ones are the sensory homunculus, and the other one is the motor homunculus. So the motor homunculus is the area of the brain in the motor cortex that represents how we would make movements with our body. So it's about, like grasping things, moving limbs, etc. The motor commands, so the action commands. Sensory homunculus is more about receiving sensations to the body. So they're quite similar in a lot of ways, but they are separable in terms of their neural representation. And when we're in sleep or in a hypnotic state, the motor homunculus is sort of down-regulated, right? You don't produce your motor actions, but the sensory homunculus still is active. So you can be in a dream, you can feel things, you can have a very vivid sensory experience, but not acted out. Okay, so that's probably the most important thing here. And the idea is that what's happening in, say, with biofeedback or in some forms of meditation is that we are intrinsically, as in with our own attention, with our own consciousness, we are stimulating our sensory or our motor pathways, right, in this recurrent loop. And it's creating this sort of like this energy flow, like in the Kundalini, and it's also stimulating the pleasure centers, so it feels really good, and it's giving us this vivid sensory energetic experience. And because it's also creating this like standing wave, it's creating coherent energy throughout the body. Okay, so that's the sort of the neuroscience in broad terms behind the things that have led to the development of Gateway. Then there are these main topics like the idea of a lamp versus a laser, right? So ordinary light that comes out of a lamp or a torch, it sort of spreads, it's diffuse, right? So it goes in a broad direction and it allows us to see, right? A laser, on the other hand, is just a singular beam of coherent light. And so it's not about illuminating a large area, but focusing energy into a single point. This is a good analogy for how our brain operates. In normal waking consciousness, we sort of openly monitor our environment. We're scanning for threats, we're scanning for like food or interesting things. We're just openly aware of things. So it's kind of like that, lamp situation. The idea is that with HemiSync, or in really focused states like high attention or deep meditation, we reduce that diffuse element of light into a very narrow band, very coherent, brain pattern. The idea is that you can use audio techniques. So there's this role of resonance in creating this very disciplined stream of consciousness, right? Similar to a laser. So the way it's achieved is through this what's called the frequency following response. Modern neuroscience would have another term for this, but and more nuance. But the basic idea is that if you play, several beeps in a row, your brain is going to start trying to predict them, right? So if it has like this frequency to it, your brain is going to start producing that frequency. Okay, you guys should be really, really familiar with this by now, but one frequency in one ear, one frequency in another. They can be quite high-pitched frequencies that we can't easily discern, but what can happen is the difference between the two creates this new frequency, the beat frequency, and this produces a very disciplined stream of neural energy. Okay, so effectively we're taking diffuse energy and turning it into very, very focused stream. And this is achieved through sound waves, right? And is allowing our brain waves to entrain itself to an external signal, right? And then we can manipulate that external signal, and with it, we can manipulate neural oscillations. Now it talks about consciousness and the consciousness energy grid, holograms, and let me just quickly recap what it's saying about the consciousness and energy. So the basic idea is that, Einstein's theory of the equivalence of mass and energy, E equals mc squared. That means energy is mass or matter. Matter is energy. We perceive the world as matter, right? As solid objects. But the truth is that's not actually the case. Everything is energy. It's just at a slowed down vibration that we perceive it as solid. But if you zoom in, then you can see that it's actually vibrating. And if you keep zooming in, you realize there's no solidity whatsoever. It's actually pure vibration, right? And so the idea is that consciousness seems to be kind of like some kind of energy. It's not really a mass or matter. We don't have necessarily a good understanding of what consciousness is, but it does seem to have more properties of energy or vibration or something like that than it does a material aspect, right? And holograms seem to be a very good explanation of what the relationship between a solid object and like energy and matter is, right? So you have the photographic plate can store a representation of an image, let's say, and it can reproduce, it can project out from that photographic plate and a representation of that image. So here we have the photographic plate that has the interference pattern between the reference beam and a working beam bounced off an apple. And so what would happen is on that plate is the hologram of an apple. And if you shine a laser beam through it, you would project out the image of an apple. It's not a real apple, it's a representation of one. So the idea is that this is it's a pretty good analogy for the brain being a photographic plate, right? It's this folded up sort of thing. And then when you shine a disciplined stream of light, let's say, consciousness through it, it creates this conscious projection. Now, the projection isn't real necessarily. It's the result of the interference pattern, and the brain is kind of that interference pattern. And as we know, with holograms, you can break them up into any like little pieces, and each one of those pieces encodes the whole image, right? So consciousness, there's something to be said about that. We don't want to be too strict in how we talk about consciousness, but between holograms, the part encoding the whole, and this sort of like 3D space, there seems to be some interesting relationship. I don't want to say too much, but the document is there. So this is where Bentov's models of time, space, and different dimensions comes in. So we've been talking a little bit about, this 3D reality potentially only being part of the picture, right? So we've talked about those 10 dimensions. Basically, 3D reality is having, height, width, and depth. But what Bentov is saying is, well, that's not really the full story, because if we were to zoom in and we kept zooming in as far as we possibly could, we would come to a limit, and that limit is the Planck length. So between every pixel or dot or bit of reality, there's actually a little gap, right, between elements of reality. So what seems like solid reality actually isn't. It's just mostly solid or mostly continuous, but there are these little gaps, right? And these gaps would be outside of what our 3D reality can represent, right? So we can get there in a couple of ways: by really zooming in, or by really moving fast, or being perfectly still. All of these are ways to get out of the 3D reality. And so what he talks about is this holographic reality that we live in. This 3D reality is actually contained within sort of the absolute reality, right? So it's only a part of the reality. It represents it because the part encodes the whole, but it's only part of the picture. And so he talks about sort of speeding up our oscillations so that we would click out of our experience of being within 3D reality and be able to experience, to some degree, the absolute, the infinite. And so this graph is sort of like energy oscillating back and forth. And when energy approaches rest, it's approaching infinite location or undefined location. And so it's changing direction, it's stopping for a moment, and at that moment it is nowhere in our normal 3D reality, and it has clicked out. And the idea being that, well, if we can sort of entrain our brain's oscillations or our energy to be in harmony with this sort of click out experience, then we too, our consciousness can also click out. And if we're in a high enough coherence, we can actually remember it consciously and then bring that information back. So it'd be like this little guy realizing that I am here as a person viewing him. He can't see me, I'm not in his reality, but it's like if he was to sort of become part of this reality that you and I are in. And so the idea is that, when we're meditating and we become perfectly coherent, perfectly aligned, perfectly still, our consciousness expands and we can kind of be anywhere, and we can gain knowledge and experience of outside of our 3D reality. In terms of the hemisync process, the gateway process, the gateway experience, there is this training that allows for out-of-body experiences. So we talked about the homunculus, and there's like this biofeedback, stimulating the motor sensory cortexes, and creating this like recurrent loop through sound waves, through these oscillations. And what's happening is we're creating this loop within that's also then connecting without, right? So when you go do the gateway training, you create this what's called the resonant energy balloon. And so you're starting to create that fountain of energy out of your head and in through your feet. You're stimulating the sensory cortices. Your different hemispheres are hearing external sounds, and you are embedded within the Earth and its ionosphere, right? Such that your energy is now connected to a larger system. And through energy entrainment, rhythm entrainment, coherence, you actually become more coherent with that energy system. Meaning that if your consciousness is associated with your body because your body sort of like contains that energy, if consciousness is more energy than matter, then your body is containing the energy of consciousness. If your body's energy becomes coherent with higher systems, then your consciousness should be able to move along the field, whatever you are coherent with. So you should feel and expansion of consciousness because you're now coherent and that energy can move. And so the training is the training to be familiar with, like hypnosis. So becoming less critical, becoming more open, more aware, having that loop, opening up, and then actively feeling yourself move out of your body, right? And so that's part of the training. And that's what the gateway method kind of, it's not necessarily designed just for that, but basically because of its design, it can do that. Okay, and so that's where the hemisync is helping. It's that fundamental critical part that enables us to take what the mystics have known for thousands of years through kundalini and chakra practices, etc., and allows us to do it in fractions of a second. Well, not fractions of a second, with small amounts of training, a couple of hours, let's say. And finally, what Bentov's model does is it creates quite a unified theory of this torus that's happening within our brain and then within a body and then within the body and the Earth's ionosphere. And it also looks at like the larger models of life. So how a black hole works, or any large system seems to have this same recurrent processing, which is called a torus, right? It's like the yin yang symbol is a torus. The heart is a vortex or a torus. Our energy in that resonant energy balloon is a torus. And actually, if you look at the smallest elements in the universe, they have these toroidal shape, right? Our genes and their proteins all curl around each other, this toroidal shape. And as you keep going up the hierarchy of complexity, you find this same basic, what he calls the universal hologram, shows up basically everywhere at all scales, right? So now we effectively have a model that links us very naturally to the rest of the universe at all scales. And that might explain why when we start to expand our consciousness, when we're in coherence and we move our consciousness intentionally slightly outside of our body, we can do it accidentally, but when we do it intentionally, we actually might start to gain universal experiences. So the ability to pull information from anywhere else in the universe through our conscious intention and will, even to the fact that we could potentially move into the past, move into the future, and move anywhere in space, because we're not anymore constricted by our normal 3D reality, right? So the specifics of the training, so for the gateway method, there's all the advanced techniques like how to solve problems, like how to visualize problems, how to visualize solutions, how to pattern your life. So identifying how you want your life to look like, the patterns you want to entrain, right? And creating these mental models through visualization and through gathering information so that you can then effectively predict your life and then create it. Traveling into the past, traveling into the future, all of that now is contained in these trainings. And so now you have all the theoretical background. We've got the book as well, so there's a bit of fun and a bit of fluff. And all the training is here. So we've now taken ourselves up to the end of wave 1, which is discovery of the process, right? So you may have played without a body or floating experiences, but when you get into wave 2, now we're actually going to step through a little bit more into the advanced stuff, okay? So that's an overview of the document. I've basically just gone sort of section by section of what the document talks about. Admittedly, there is plenty that I haven't covered. There's plenty of detail in there. What I've wanted to do here is just try to create a coherent narrative that touches on the most important parts and just spans between, the neuroscience, the esoteric philosophy, the layperson interpretation, the audio techniques, hemisync itself, as well as, the role of resonance, coherence, etc. So hopefully I've done that. And now I'm going to see if there's anything else. Yeah. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and going to bring it back to you guys. All right. How are we doing on time? All right, still got about 15 minutes. So over to you. Is there anyone want to say anything, ask anything I should clarify? Go ahead.
I've noticed that they haven't referred to fractal geometry at all. Is there some value in fractal geometry or just fractals in general in understanding that? Because I watched that 10, that powers of 10 thing.
Yep.
And it just keeps popping into my head, fractal. And I know you know a fair bit about it. That's why I thought I'd just.
No, it's a really good question. By its very nature, a hologram is a fractal. So light And sine waves, so those waves, they have a fractal nature. So you can keep decomposing them into further like sine waves, right? And that goes up and down. So a hologram, because that part encodes the whole thing, you can take any part and you have the whole. That is fractality. Yeah. Awesome. Anything else? Mel, looks like you were just enjoying that as a as almost a movie or a story time.
Yeah, honestly, I love it. I don't have any questions. I've just, like you said, I've been enjoying it like a movie or a story time. Like I'm just like, this makes sense. All these stories and things that I've like wondered about. I'm like, oh, it's just like all the answers being laid out. So I'm just like lapping it up.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's
Right.
been really good.
Perfect. You continue that. Abel, did I see you raise your hand? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have a question. Do you have any recommendations on how should we practice our meditation, or any place where we can investigate about it? Because I find it quite easily to meditate when you are very energetic, when you are not, but when you are tired or something, it's quite easy to get distracted, and it's quite easy to fall asleep also.
Sure. Yeah.
So maybe.
Yes, that's there's a couple ways. Probably you'd be best served by meditating, practicing sitting up, right? So get into the lotus position. So sitting cross-legged. You don't have to do the full where you're like one foot on your knee kind of thing, or both feet on your knee. You don't have to do that. But by sitting up, it's just going to, if you start to fall asleep, you will actually kind of jerk yourself awake. So that's a really good way to do it. Also, if you're doing it at night before you fall asleep and you've, had a really busy day, like Mel will know this. If you want to practice lucid dreaming, actually, you can't be going to bed absolutely dead tired, because you fall straight into deep sleep, right? So to some degree, you have to do this with a degree of energy. So perhaps for you, maybe earlier in the day is better. So maybe getting up earlier and then doing some hemisync. So you could practice the meditation, do it upright so that you practice staying awake, because that is actually one of the first major barriers to getting good at meditation is keeping consciousness and keeping alert. It's really just mental discipline. It's not easy, but it's a very trainable skill. And then otherwise, like if you are constantly falling asleep, have a cup of tea, like a black tea or even coffee beforehand, depending on your own, thresholds for these things. But don't be afraid to, pep yourself up a little bit for this.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I wanted to add something. It's not a question, but something that helped me add even more context is a video that I found. Like it's the one with Bentov talking, but then there is the second part with his wife that explains in detail all his framework and
Okay.
line of thought. So I
Awesome.
don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not sure that I am. I've seen some of Bentov's interviews where he draws like the
Yeah.
bell curve of like human consciousness rising, things like that. But the one you're talking about, I'm not sure.
Yeah, there is one in which the second more than half, it's his wife explaining his methodology to beginners, basically.
Okay.
Like
cool.
after he died in the plane crash, she was spreading the message. I guess I can share it with you in the chat, guys. If
Yeah,
you're
please.
interested.
That'd be awesome, and I'll make sure that is passed on to the school. Anything else? And also, throw open to questions on your experiences of wave one. If you have any personal, technical, whatever questions, philosophical, go for it.
Do you think we have to memorize the affirmation, or I was thinking like reading it and maybe make an association with a symbol or a color, and then just think of that symbol when he talks about
Yeah.
repeating.
That's a good question. I haven't memorized it, but when he does say, go through that preparatory process, what I'll typically do is I'll reaffirm to myself that I do want to expand, I do want to know, I want to grow, I want to learn from people or intelligence that's more advanced than me. So I don't know exactly what it is, but I sort of remember the main key parts. If you have a method, symbolic memorization, something like that, yeah, go for it. I think it's an intention, right? That's my feeling.
Just on that, something that I do is I put my intentions on my phone. So I'm, seeing it all the time and it just sinks in. So you might want to do something like that.
Yeah, that's good repetition. Awesome. Angie, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just laying down and I feel like having the camera. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, with the affirmation is that once you repeat the affirmation, you're already in a different state, So getting the phone to read it or anything is just a bit distracting from my experience, So I memorize the first 2 lines and the rest is just wanting to expand and learn and understand and all of that, but also just to be safe and only learn from people that are in a higher vibrational state than me.
Yeah.
I think something that's important, and I don't know if you guys are up to it in the book yet or not. He talks about protecting yourself before going into these realms. So yeah, because especially when we're going into like astral projection and lucid dreaming and things like that, I think it's also just important that we all kind of focus on like our energy bubble and having white light around us and focusing on going into higher places and just sort of protection before we go in, because otherwise you can get a bit of a shock or some like not so nice experiences happen. And they explain that in the book in a few chapters in a bit more detail. So I just wanted to like, while we're like going ahead in the meditations, also try and keep up with the book or just keep that in mind, because otherwise you might be going into astral realms and you're not fully protected and yeah, that's all.
Yep. So I think for this week it would be worth us returning to the book and let's go all the way through now. That's the major thing to focus on. And I did go through to the end of the book and there's like an appendix section where it talks about the Kundalini and the sensory experiences, the energetic experiences. So I would love for you guys to go and get the full picture with fully understanding that, some of it is his projection. It's not, some of it's not verifiable, but it's worth reading for the reasons that Mel said. And also, yeah, he does in the next sections, he talks about like the levels of consciousness. And I think that's going to be a really good mental model to work through. So good point. And yeah, so that resonant energy balloon is going to be a valuable practice of protection. Okay, I'm happy to stick around till the half hour. I just wanted to say that, so this is the end of 4 weeks, right? So we did hit that initial milestone that I wanted to hit, and I think we've actually gone at a really good pace. We've gone through the document, we've gone through both those major videos, first 4 chapters of Bentov, and you've gone through an entire wave of training. From here, I'm happy to keep bringing some material each week for the next, at least, let's say 2 weeks. I guess from this point on, it's kind of optional what level of engagement you want to have, because you guys have done amazing. And I can understand like life gets busy. It's not so easy to set aside so much time. I would love to have you still. So it's really up to you whether you want to continue. I'm happy to go at least 2 more weeks like this, read the book, ask questions, practice, right? And then we'll decide at 6 weeks what we want to do. Likely that'll probably be enough, because this is actually quite draining as well on me. I love it, absolutely love it. So if there's tremendous amounts of energy and people want to keep going, then fuck yeah, I'm all for it. But let's aim for 2 more weeks, finish the book, and keep practicing that next wave. How does that sound to you guys?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yep.
So do you want us to do the whole next wave then before next Thursday?
Yeah, well, what I'd say is at this point, go at a pace that makes sense for you.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You could get up to a daily practice if you want to. You do have enough background knowledge. I think Mel's point is important. Do keep up with the reading. So if you're going to practice, you should also be engaged in the theory as well, right? So read the book if you're going to practice. How far you want to go, entirely up to you.
Yep. Okay. Right.
Okay. Any final thoughts or questions?
No, thank you, Regan.
Awesome. You guys are welcome. We did really well, actually. We had a really good, solid chat in the beginning, some good banter, some funny stories. I'll make sure that gets posted. And I'll separate the two. I'm not sure if I said that while everyone was here. I'll separate the two. So the first chat, we'll just make that into like a Q&A recording, and then we'll have the training as well. So yeah, I'm going to start posting those things out into the school community as well. So similarly, if you did feel like anything was said that you were uncomfortable with, whatever, and you wanted it censored, let's say, I'm open to negotiation.
It's fine. And I still haven't been smoking, so woohoo!
Hey, all right.
I'm like you, I don't care. I can say whatever I want, so it's fine. I am my own boss.
Smoking
But
what,
yeah.
though? What have you not been smoking?
Nothing. I haven't been smoking anything, but I was smoking weed like every single day.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
For my whole life, basically.
Yeah.
Like my parents smoked as I was a child. My husband's parents smoked. We both smoked. So it was just like I've only not smoked while I was pregnant. That's it. So every day for my whole life, I've smoked weed. And it's always been, or not always, but the last few years, it's been something that I've always battled with, and I had like this internal, but I just couldn't. I just would be sober and be like, and I like couldn't deal with reality, like fully.
Yeah.
And yeah, since doing this, I haven't smoked at all. So
I suspect that plays a role in some of the life realignment stuff as well. So that's a major pattern that you've changed in this.
Yeah, it's been huge. So yeah, I'm really proud. So I'm loving it. Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Okay. There was some narrative around the use of chemicals to help get into a state, and they were saying that you can do it short term, but that'll affect your ability to do it naturally. It has some damage to your ability to be able to do it through the gateway process, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, I heard that in the book too, and about how it affects your nervous system, and then you're not able to, like your antenna is weakened, kind of a thing. So
it was quite interesting.
Yeah.
I imagine there's pros and cons, and obviously like overdoing things or doing it to the point of burning yourself out. Like, I mean, we've all seen like the meth head, and it's like there is no coming back from that, right? Like you can see people definitely go beyond a tipping point. I would also say that probably because what we're dealing with is altered states of consciousness, I suspect that to some degree, certain enhancements, like certain substances, are going to provide a level of enhancement in the beginning, sort of like a performance enhancing drug, right?
Like my tea.
Like the tea. You know, when I was in doing my undergrad and even to some degree PhD. Like, you know, I drink a lot of coffee, or even I tried some like Dexies, like Ritalin type stimulants. It's like the stuff that I learned and the things that I didn't lose it. Like I retained it. So being in a heightened or altered state of consciousness can, like, if you're using a substance to get you there, I imagine it opens the doors a little. But yes, I think you do really, really want to be careful with these things. Treat them with utmost respect. So I think there's truth, but also flexibility in that statement. But does that sound reasonable, or am I probably off base there?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, chemicals are different. I think with the book, it's more talking about like, you know, cocaine and meth and things like that, or if you're overdoing it to the point that you're not functioning properly. But small amounts can really enhance it. Like you're talking about like microdosing mushrooms and things like that. It's natural. It's from the earth. That I wouldn't classify that as a drug. Some people do, but that's actually going to like open up your consciousness a bit and help to connect you to the earth. So I see what you mean. And just like small things here and there, it's not the end of the world. But if you're doing stuff every day to mask, or like, you know, I wasn't smoking, like no one would even know. It was just tiny little amounts. You know, I wasn't like sitting on the lounge smoking bongs all day or anything, but just little bits. But yeah, so then there's a difference, right?
Yeah. Anyway, interesting thought, and it's a point well taken. Like obviously you want to be very respectful of your brain, of your energy, of these substances. So yeah. All right, look, that's 9:30 my time. Appreciate you guys' attendance. I assume I'll see you all next week, but obviously, you know, if anyone's had enough, that's cool. I get it. There's actually quite a lot here, but I'm happy to go for another 2 weeks and then we'll reassess.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, love it.
Awesome. Take care, team.
Thank you.
See you soon.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye. Sweet
See ya.
dreams.
Bye.